We're on the internet? Okay. Well, good morning, and welcome to everyone who's here. And this is the call to order for the Buncombe County Planning Board on August the 21st, 2023 at 9:34 a.m. And are there any announcements this morning? Okay. Then we will have our roll call of board members.
Nancy Waltrip,
Here.
Mike Fisher,
Here.
Tim Collins,
Here.
Ken Pond,
Here.
Anthony Costi,
Here.
And next we have the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that passes. Then we have the approval of the minutes from July the 17th, 2023.
Motion to approve.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then the minutes are approved. And then the first thing on our agenda today to discuss is the planning board procedures. And I guess that is up to our attorney.
Yeah, hi, Chair, board members. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Kurt Euler. I am a senior attorney with the county attorney's office, and I've been assigned to the planning board. So you've probably seen me for the past couple meetings. County staff asked me to produce a sort of a basic rules of procedure for the board. Pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 160D-308, that statute states that you all are required to have procedures for conducting the meeting. It doesn't say how complicated your procedures are or what has to be in that, but you have to adopt something. And most boards and commissions within the county all have basic operating procedures. So what I did is I took, kind of our basic template that we use, and I put it and made it so that it works with the planning board. And it's pretty basic. It essentially talks about, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get it there. First thing, the name of the board, the terms that you all serve, although those are set forth in the planning board ordinance. But we state that you hold regularly scheduled meetings. You have the ability to call for special meetings should it be. So you have the ability to call special meetings when somebody can add something to the agenda. That normally doesn't happen in your case, but just in case it does. The presiding officer and what to do if, let's say, the chair and the vice chair are both absent on a day in question, then it would basically, you would appoint one member by vote, majority vote. So that's something. Attendance, while there's no official attendance requirement, most of our things say that you try to attend 75% of the meetings. What constitutes a quorum? In your case, there are 9 board members, so 5 people need to be here. Voting, and what to do in case there's a conflict of interest, where a member can excuse themselves from voting and not be counted against the quorum. Talks that the secretary will prepare minutes of each meeting that you all, and then this is something that not all boards have that we've included in yours, is the public comment period and the rules for public comment, which are essentially following the same things that they do at the commissioners meeting, where a person can speak for 3 minutes. They address the board, not a specific member. The people who are addressing the board are expected to observe the decorum of the chamber and be respectful. The
Mhm.
chairperson has the ability to declare someone out of order should that happen. And then finally, we have amendments to the operating procedures that you all can amend these procedures at any time as long as you have a quorum. And then we have other procedural matters, which is sort of that a member makes a motion, that all motions require a second before the motions can be discussed. One motion at a time. We don't normally have a lot of these problems. The chair then will open the motion for debate. And other things, we also have listed other orders such as to adjourn, to take a recess, to follow the agenda, to suspend the rules, and many others that we don't normally use. And then we stated that in the case that there's something that is not covered in our rules of procedure, we would reference Robert's Rules of Procedure, but we don't necessarily have to follow Robert's Rules of Procedure. That tends to complicate things, especially when you adopt Robert's, but we would refer to that for guidance should there be some issue that we don't, that we haven't come across and that's not in our bylaws. So that is basically it. So if you all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
Two quick ones. What is the proper form of address for the county attorney? Can I call you Kurt? Or
You
should I
can
be-
call me Kurt. I would prefer you all to call me Kurt. That's very easy. I'm not very
All right.
formal, but thank you.
Second, a little more substantial. If somebody is appointed, as I was, and as Cindy's successor would be in the middle of the term, how many terms are they then allowed to serve?
I don't know the answer off the top of my head. Normally, people are allowed to have 2 terms, but I don't know if there's any term limits or not. I would, if you could hang on a second, I would be happy to.
It's 3 terms, and there are no term limits.
But that's for the state. The county has a
Okay.
commissioner set up.
Okay.
There have been some term limits in the past, but there's still, there or not, I don't know.
So, and I think today is really an opportunity for us to kind of rip these apart, have good discussions, and any lingering questions we can get answered. I do know that the commissioners are looking at some boards in terms of, some do have term limits and others have been more fluid over time. So I think let's yellow highlight that one as one we come back to. But really today wasn't a vote, it's really to start having the discussion. Maybe we want to add things. We talked a lot about decorum, having a specific section on that, especially public comment, especially when public comment tends to start veering into, sort of unacceptable territory. And we just haven't had that before. So it gives you the ability to reinforce, what you want to see.
One quick question. The planning board, I take it, has been around for quite some time, or at least to my knowledge it has. I'm new to the board. Are there existing rules now if the previous boards have policies or rules, or I'm just checking on that?
To be honest, I don't know if you all had any or that you adopted any. I'm not sure.
You've got a pretty good section in the Code of Ordinances that outlines, but it talks really more about what you do. We had a draft floating around for years that just was never formally adopted. This is kind of like finally getting to that point. We haven't had anything going on over the past few years at all, but all jokes aside, no, we haven't really had anything formalized that we are aware of.
I have a question, and maybe it was addressed before I got here. With Cindy on the way out, will one of the elder board members move into that slot?
It's advertised. They still have the position advertised, so people can still apply for Cindy's vacancy.
But as vice chair,
So that, good point. If that's where you're going with that, we probably need to have another election of officers.
Normally, a lot of the boards and commissions in the county, not that you necessarily have to follow this or not, but usually since July is like the beginning of the new county fiscal year, most boards have elections in July, and then they run basically through June of the next year, and then they redo that on a yearly basis. I also looked at the ordinance, and it did not state anything about any term limits. It just states that you serve a 3-year term. So it appears that you can be reappointed and go on for until the commissioners decide there, until you or the commissioners decide that you no longer want to be doing this anymore.
That's very interesting.
In the best interest of the county, wouldn't it make sense that one of the elder board members being aware of,
Who you calling old?
not older, but I mean, as far as your tenure on the board, wouldn't it make sense that someone that's already up to speed on what's been going on be the correct person to succeed her?
I mean, typically you find that amongst boards, but I've seen a lot of things happen. So it's not anything that's required. I think it's like a mutual respect type of thing, rather where you see that kind of, but there's nothing written that says it has to be, because really it's up to you all to elect your own representatives.
I could say in my experience, it's normally who wants to serve in the positions, that not everybody wants to serve in those positions. So it's normally the board kind of figures out who wants to do what and then make nominations. So, so whoever wants to be the vice chair, because not everybody wants to be the vice chair, or not everybody wants to be the chair. So normally the board kind of has informal discussions about who wants to do what position.
Yes, I come from the Crime Stoppers Board, and I came in as a resident for the East End and was on that for about 6 or 7 years. And then the chairman decided to step down, and then I took it over. But I just took it, just said, I'll take it over, or whoever, and then they had a vote. And we didn't have term limits on regular board members. We didn't even have term limits on the chairman either, as far as that. But now, one thing I was wanting to ask on the quorum, could we just write something in there? We had this through Crime Stoppers, had a proxy. If somebody's not going to be able to be there, or if something come up the day before the meeting, to have like a proxy to give to the chairman to give that vote. That way we can also have a quorum also. Is there something like that? You kind of understand what I'm saying?
Yes, and I don't know of any county boards that actually do that.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah, we did that in Crime Stoppers, but I mean, that was that, and this might be just a little bit different.
Well,
I just didn't know.
The most of the boards that at least from my personal experience that I cover, require that you be present to vote.
Right.
And that sometimes even extends to where sometimes someone attends by telephone or something like that based on an emergency. Like with the county commissioners, if they attend by telephone or something like that, they're not able to vote on now. While they can hear and participate, they're not allowed to vote. And a lot of times you'll be hearing evidence, you'll be hearing things from people who are present at the hearing, where probably it would be best that the person be there to attend, but that's up to you.
I just didn't want it to interfere with it, just thought I'd just throw that out there.
No, most of the time with quorum issues is when somebody gets up to leave and they're not excused. That means that they're still, under a lot of the rules, that means that they're still counted as present and that they're voting affirmative on everything.
Isn't that something that involves the state statutes as well? Because with the Board of Adjustments, they've always been able to have like alternative people to come in, but we've never been able to do that as the planning board.
Yeah, well, one of the things is that the legislation allows you to have additional board members for the Board of Adjustment. What's kind of weird about the planning board, not that weird, but that the planning board really is organized under county ordinances that basically haven't really been touched since 1993. The law has changed a lot since 1993, especially with the adoption of Chapter 160D that really kind of changed what the planning board does and doesn't. So there's nothing in Chapter 160D that allows for alternate members. If the commissioners decide that they want to have alternate members, I don't see anything that legally says that they can't do that. But normally the planning board has been the 9 members with a quorum of 5.
So am I understanding correctly that it's kind of like open season now on what we come up with for these bylaws, and that but the commissioners will have to approve whatever we recommend?
No, I don't think that the commissioners need to approve your bylaws at anything. I think that you need to essentially stay within the state statute and the county ordinance regarding the planning board. But those are really the 2, I would say, guardrails that you need to keep in between.
Oh, so it's totally up to us to decide how we want to have term limits and all of those things then.
Well, I would think that if you're talking about term limits, that would be something where you would need to amend the ordinance. That if you wanted to have term limits, you would need to make a recommendation to the board or the Board of Commissioners and have them amend that.
Okay.
But for what you can do is procedures, how you hire, the types of officers you have, what you call the officers, most of your day-to-day activity or, meeting-to-meeting activities is within your control. But the sort of the number of people on the board, how long the terms are, those things are all set in the county ordinance.
And are the county ordinances different from the state ordinances?
I'm just trying. Yes, they are. Well, the state ordinance doesn't really set forth any requirements like how many people need to be on the planning board, terms, anything like that. They basically state, the planning board, this is what the state law says. A planning board of any side composed, deemed appropriate and organized in a manner deemed appropriate, that the board shall have at least 3 members. That's the only restriction for a planning board. And then the state statute goes into what your duties are. But they don't talk about term limits. They don't talk about the length of the term and the number of people above 3 on the board.
Okay, I guess I'm just trying to figure out what exactly our parameters are, because I'm not sure that at the moment.
Sure. Well, I think that, based on what we've done in the sample board procedures, we've come up with, we've regurgitated some of the stuff from the ordinance and put it in your the bylaws or the procedures. But who is the officer? So, suppose you want to have a chairperson, a first vice chair, a second vice chair. That's something within your parameters. When you meet is something that's within your parameters. If you need to call a special meeting, that, let's see here. How you set your agenda, whether you take public comment or not. Um, I'm trying, that's basically it. I mean, or at least that's, that's what the procedures cover.
It's not as complicated as say the Board of Adjustment, because, when you have the Board of Adjustment, you're deciding things like who has standing. It gets really specific there, but being a legislative board, your bumper guards are a lot wider than their very narrow ones.
Okay,
So you have flexibility.
that's always good.
So one quick question.
Mhm.
Earlier you talked about quorum and you talked about members being excused. I flipped over here to this section. A couple attorneys on the board, and like today, I'm going to have to excuse myself to go to court in just a moment. So I checked in with Shannon and I checked in with the chair, but apparently that's not going to be what's needed for me to withdraw without interfering with the hearing. or
I
meeting.
think a motion to be excused.
So in a hearing or in any meeting?
I think anytime, I think there are two times, if you need to leave, I think having the board excuse you, that would preserve the quorum and allow the meeting to continue. So like in this case, if you just, the quorum, well, no, the way that we have it set up, I'm trying to think of how we have that set up with other boards. Normally, when we have a quorum at the beginning of the meeting, you're good to go. If somebody gets up and leaves, normally we treat that as without being excused, is that person's vote counts as in the affirmative. Okay, so in this case, since there's only 5, if you were excused from voting, they could still vote with the 4 and your vote wouldn't count as the affirmative.
So need to have the majority of the board vote to excuse you when quorum is at issue, but when you get to a place where you're at 9 and you're more than, you could probably withdraw and not need a vote, correct?
Well, it just depends whether the person who's leaving wants their vote to count in the affirmative or not on the agenda or any future agenda items.
Okay. And then it's also okay to skulk out if there's no vote, right?
Yeah. Well, no, we've had that problem, and that's why I wanted to say, especially when we're having electronic meetings, we would get a quorum, and then all of a sudden people would kind of start to blip out and things like that. And then if a vote was called, and you didn't have enough people, that could be a problem. So what we've done in most of our rules based on that is basically say that at the beginning of the meeting, you have a quorum, especially since none of your votes require, like the Board of Adjustments, if somebody's doing a variance, 4/5 of the people need to be present to vote. So that would be a much different situation if you just cut out and left. But here it's majority.
And one additional thing too is because there's technically a vacancy on the planning board, your calculation's a little bit different. So you actually would say 8, and then what's your quorum based on that?
It'd still be 5.
So if somebody needs to, any day, if somebody needs to leave the meeting, should they, what should they do? Should they motion to be excused, or do they just get up and walk out if there's all 9 of us, or how does?
I think a motion to be excused is the appropriate thing to do, just so that you're not voting in affirmatively on things that you might not want to vote affirmatively on. That's usually the best practice. Or if you have a conflict of interest or something like that, where you need to be excused from voting on the specific agenda item.
And when is the moment to do that? Do you wait till you need to excuse, or could you just address it right at the beginning when we're doing the agenda and the quorum and just say, I'm going to need to go? And
I mean, I think you can raise it at any time, but I think the best time to raise it would be at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay.
So that then you don't have to interrupt what's going on when you need to get up and leave.
It's too late. now.
Too late, can't do it.
I think the judge may have a view on that.
Yeah, that's true.
I'd like to make a motion to be excused. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
So this is just for initial review and input, and we would adopt when?
We haven't established that yet. I've been taking some notes. Some of the things that I've written down are differences between section 58 of the Code of Ordinances of the county versus 160D. Term limits, we want to make sure that the commissioners
Right.
were consistent with what they're doing kind of universally, and then we'll bring that back to you. Election of officers, which coincidentally, if you scroll through, it talks about at the beginning of the fiscal year, which
Mhm.
makes total sense. Proxies, alternate members, planning board versus board of adjustment, motions to be excused, establishment of quorum and how those relate together. I think those are some of the things that I took away from this. If there are other things, please brainstorm. Maybe we do one more discussion and then we bring it back to you for a vote, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, I do have one question. I was always under the impression that planning board were 3-year terms, not 3. Have I just been living in a dream world?
I think we've been all over the map in terms of different boards across the county. I know that the commissioners can actually overrule their own rules on term limits. That's actually occurred
Rules.
before.
Flexible rules.
I will say this, it is very hard on some boards to get, if you've structured your board in a way that says something like, a design, I'm making this up, so bear with me. A design review board shall have one architect, one engineer. It gets
Right.
even more tricky when
Right.
you start doing geographic areas. So Terry just mentioned social services. Because the county does have, by its very nature, a lot of boards and they're structured very differently. You can have some level of uniformity, but you can't have full uniformity.
Hmm.
So let us check in on that and
Okay.
we'll bring a couple of updates to you.
Well, and when I started, which I don't even remember when that was now, there were definitely term limits and there were 3 years and you could serve 2 and whatever was unfulfilled if you got appointed. And I mean, I think that has changed somewhat since then, but that's where it was when I started.
That's what I thought.
And in relationship to geography, Mike mentioned it for another board there. Do we look at this board from geography, like I'm in North Buncombe County and it appears he may be in East Buncombe? Do
So
y'all look to that?
it was in the past and it
Okay,
got
it was.
tricky because it
Yeah.
was based on,
Yeah.
if I recall, school district.
It was, but people move and that,
Yes.
while they're still serving, and
And-
that creates an issue.
Screwed up the geography. I got you.
Any other discussion on this morning?
It's good to have it.
Yeah,
But just ultimately on the quorum and how you all handled that, I think that would be within your parameters as to what to do if somebody wants to excuse themselves and how you want to handle that. Should you choose to go in a different route than what we're doing somewhere else, that would be within your purview.
well, I just think it makes it more clear for everybody if they know this is what I need to do in this situation, or this is what.
And that's exactly
allows
what these are
for.
for, sure.
Yeah. And you can get overloaded with rules, but I think people just basic operating the way we operate, that's all good to know and to have
Mhm.
laid out. Okay,
Agreed.
all right, then we're ready to move on. Then the next thing on the agenda for today is subdivision application updates.
Is there a lockout? Is there a passcode?
Yeah.
What is the passcode?
Right, so I'm gonna give you a brief overview of some of the subdivisions, the major and minor subdivisions we've received since March. And if there's a specific one that you wanna know more about, we can always open up the file, pull up the site plan and take a deeper dive, but this is just an overview of what we've been receiving at the planning department. How do I just gotta scroll back up. Okay. So since March, we have had 6 minor subdivisions and 3 major subdivisions for a total of 9. And this is a map that shows the general location of those. Let me see if I can zoom out a little bit. There we go. You can see we've had a lot clustered towards the south, generally around city limits. There's been a couple more to the north in Leicester and one close to Weaverville's town limits. At the moment, we have 4 that are currently in review by staff. 4 have been granted preliminary approval. That means that they can begin moving into construction of infrastructure. And 6 are on private roads or shared driveways rather than off of a publicly maintained road. We've got 1 that's on hold currently.
I have a quick question for you.
Yep.
Because I'm excused, and I'm gonna be bolting here in just a minute. Well, I can skulk too, if need be. I was teaching a class this weekend, and I got a chance to talk to several planners from other counties. And specifically, they came up to me to talk about subdivisions. And it appears that other counties, when they work on subdivision plans, some of the planning departments require developers to incorporate medium income and low income housing into some of those projects. Do we do that here in Buncombe County, or are we planning to do that? Can you give me a little info on that?
So through just a standard minor or major subdivision application, there's no requirements that they include a specific income range, and we don't even require that they disclose what income range they are planning for. I believe that would be inclusionary zoning. Would you say, Nate, or do you want to add to that?
I think now that the comp plan has been adopted, we will be changing some of our development review procedures. We probably will have a conditional zoning component. I think in terms of, and I don't know the planners you were talking to, whether they were municipalities or counties, but I think we do have to think a little differently in terms of our needs. Right now, we're just trying to address the supply problem because obviously that's part of affordable housing as well. But we do have, as it stands now, some processes through the Board of Adjustment with development review that have included some affordable. I think what we're going to have to do in the future is be clear about what our exactions are, what we expect of the development community. And if we did have an opportunity to have a process like you described with the planners you've been talking to, that would be done through conditional zoning, because we do know with the General Assembly, with statutes, that conditional zoning is allowable and many communities do it. We don't have it yet, but there are plenty of other counties, including Henderson County, that has, our other benchmark community, New Hanover, has a conditional zoning process as well. Stay tuned on that. We will be bringing you all some text amendments in the future. We're not quite there with rolling out our schedule, but there is quite a bit of work to do in the near future.
And then one other follow-up question, it just comes from my discussion with these planners. There are counties in North Carolina where development, not necessarily a subdivision, occurs across a county line. Do we encounter that here in Buncombe County, or is that unique to the eastern part of the state?
I'd say, look, more largely, you're going to find that in the eastern part of the state. I will tell you that the couple of examples, and Shannon and Haley jump in at any point, that we do see here are access, where you've actually got access into another county, specifically that McDowell line from Buncombe County. It's the only way you can actually get across the county. So that does push and spur out development that way. I will tell you another interesting thing we've run across recently. We've actually seen water supply brought up from Henderson County on a project down from the south. So we do have some interesting interrelationship sort of development pieces. I will say historically, the airport itself has created a tail for Buncombe County. But that's part of Buncombe County. So I'm sure at some point in time, that line was readdressed because of that issue. So.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, those are good questions.
Well, if I can just add too, while we don't have conditional zoning yet, we do have a community-oriented development program, and it's separate from the subdivision process. but it's a incentive. So if you choose to do a community-oriented development, you get additional density. And one of the requirements of that is that you include either affordable housing or workforce housing. So it's not that we can require that, but it definitely provides some benefits to the developers, and it's a good tool that they can use if they do want to increase their density.
Can I drill down on what you just said just a little bit?
Mhm.
And I don't mean to take us off the rails here, but does the county have a specific definition of differentiation between affordable and workforce?
We do. Off the top of my head, I don't know, but typically we go by HUD definitions, area median income
Okay.
for those determinations, and it is a set number that we use.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'm happy to answer more questions too if you want to really get into some of those things.
Thank you, Shannon.
In terms of what we've seen since March, though, some of the smallest projects we've seen have had as few as 3 lots within the subdivision, and then the largest one we have currently is 84 lots. So that's 164 total lots since March. And we're starting to see a lot smaller subdivisions compared to what we have in the past. And some of that might be just dwindling amount of land that people can purchase to subdivide. Some of it might be cost of construction. You know, there's a lot of different reasons we might be seeing that, but they are tending to be less number of lots in the subdivisions that we're receiving. And that is the update that we have. If you had specific questions about any of the ones you saw on the map, I'm happy to pull up a site plan or look at it more.
Could you tell me a little more about the Pleasant Grove subdivision?
So that was a major subdivision of 40 lots. And that one is a private access road. They will have MSD public sewer and City of Asheville water. Would you like to look at the site plan?
I was just more, where exactly is that located?
Let's go back to the map. So Pleasant Grove, that is the one that is closest to the Weaverville jurisdiction to the north.
Okay. I was going to say, don't they have
I have
Weaverville
to
water?
double check.
They don't have Weaverville water?
I can double check if you'd
I
like.
think it's Weaverville water. The question remains up there is whether it got annexed or did not. They've been toggling with a couple of different things up there, specifically their water supply itself.
Right.
Hmm.
But I think that they have completed a study, and if my memory serves me correctly, it is Weaverville water.
Well, that's why I was asking, because it's not that far from where I live,
Yeah.
if I was putting all this in the right perspective. And they are supposed to be being annexed. Yes,
Well, then that answers that question.
because they're not annexing without Weaverville water. I mean,
Yeah, but I have seen a couple in the past that having the Weaverville water without annexation, but now keep in mind too, they probably pay a differential water rate too.
They do, because we do that, but the town of Weaverville has now decided they're not providing any more water to anyone outside the city. So if you want to be part of the city, you've got to be annexed into the city.
So yeah, you're right. We have a commitment letter from Weaverville for that water
Okay.
system.
I mean, at the end of the day, our Frankenstein water system, it's all connected.
Frankenstein.
Turn a valve on here, you've got, Woodford, Boston, Nashville, like how the same.
Well,
Definitely have a complicated water system as we all.
Well, and the only reason I was asking is because people keep asking me about that development, because Maple Trace, which was the first development that the planning board approved when I sat on the planning board, or got on the planning board, is now trying to be annexed as well for multiple reasons, not just the water, but, and that is moving forward. But I was just curious because it all kind of affects each other.
Yeah, and I'm sure trash pickup and other things
Yes.
have something to do with that.
Yeah.
Maybe perhaps lighting, sidewalks, those sort of things.
Right, streets.
It's fairly, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, a very big one. We're still waiting on that one, but yes. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. And which one of them?
It's good to get that report. I mean,
Yeah.
that's helpful.
And I love the map too.
That is them.
So you guys, I have a question. Are you liking the iPads so far.
I think it's, I love it.
That's not the one.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it's very much easier to have it in front of you. But I'll probably still need paper.
I get it.
Make notes.
That was something we've been practicing for quite some time, so. I know it took
And they're
a while.
easy to use.
Yeah, they're very easy to
That's
use.
great feedback.
You just have to make sure you wipe them down.
A
Yeah, we got you.
lot of greasy fingers around
Well, I'm
here.
just thinking, you know, the numbers are starting to climb again.
Landers tend to be germaphobes by their very nature.
Interesting.
Okay,
We shall begin a wiping regimen, even if it's in the Bible. All right.
well, we appreciate all of that, especially having them, so
Yeah.
thank
Okay,
you.
That's great.
So I guess, are we finished with this discussion? Or we're
Yeah.
ready for the
So,
last piece? All right, the last thing on the agenda today is a public comment, and I think we do have at least one person who wants to speak. And because I forgot to announce this earlier, when you're ready to speak, if you will just come to the podium and tell us your name and the general area of the county where you live. You don't have to give us your address. Oh, okay, very good. And typically we have a sign-up sheet, especially if we know we're going to have a big public comment session, like on a subdivision or something like that. Or actually, we don't do subdivisions, but zoning issues. Then we ask you to sign up, which Stephanie has today, and I think Dee Dee has today as well. So we'll just proceed on with that, and you do get 3 minutes to speak.
Hello. Is that on? Okay. My name is Stephanie Chow, and about 7 years ago, I saw a problem that we had in our community, and I made it my mission to divert the millions of pounds of unnecessary waste that is going into our landfill every year. I am now the owner of a local business called Pet Poo Skidoo, where we scoop the dog waste in residential yards and empty out commercial pet waste stations. As strange as this may sound, we take it a step further by composting everything we collect. I've developed a safe and efficient way to compost pet waste, dog waste bags, cat litter, and even a small test run of baby diapers. The problem that I have today are with the permits that are now required for my composting site in Black Mountain that was purchased back in 2017. Prior to my purchase, I had made sure the parcel was in compliance with state composting guidelines in terms of distance from neighboring properties and waterways, and the only initial requirement that Buncombe County communicated to me was to operate on open use land as opposed to commercially zoned land. My ideal choice would have been farmland, but due to low inventory and rising costs of small farms in the area, I had no choice but to purchase a parcel that is 40 minutes from my house in a remote area of Buncombe County, high up on a mountainside. Although the land was only $25,000, it would take over $100,000 to install a driveway that could reach a usable space in the center that would have enough of a buffer to meet state guidelines. The cleared landing that I operate on is quite small, at only about 70 feet by 35 feet, which is about 1/15 of an acre or half the size of a basketball court. What I failed to realize at the time was that since the driveway had to be made so long, it would push it over a 1 acre clearing, which would trigger the need for a permit. This was not brought to my attention until earlier this year when I applied for an electrical permit, and the county told me that I would first need to apply for stormwater and erosion control. For the past 8 months, I have tried to work with the county, spending close to $10,000 on engineering and permitting fees, but the latest request is just too high, as the stormwater pollution prevention plan will cost me another $30,000 to $40,000. This is despite the land already having been cleared and stable for the past 7 years, and I have installed multiple protective measures such as silt fencing, large culverts, and straw wattling. I requested on multiple occasions for someone from the county to come to see my property, but have been denied every time. I recently discovered that there are certain types of activities that are exempt from stormwater regulations under the Sedimentation Pollution Control Act of 1973. From what I understand, the following section of the act was made to support the use of land for agricultural endeavors. Quote, activities including the production and activities relating or incidental to the production of crops, grains, fruits, vegetables, ornamental and flowering plants, dairy, livestock, poultry, and all other forms of agriculture undertaken on agricultural lands for the production of plants and animals useful to land, including but not limited to, the very last line includes mulch, ornamental plants, and other horticultural products. This section clearly leaves room for interpretation, and I believe composting would fit neatly in line with these activities. The same wording is listed in the stormwater ordinance, except for the mulch and ornamental plants at the bottom, which I believe should be reinstated. For example, I would be exempt if I had the same exact clearing, but placed 3 cows on the property and they would output the same amount of waste that we compost right now. We currently compost 6,000 pounds per month, which is the equivalent of just 3 cows worth of manure. And the maximum that we can do in our small space is 20,000 pounds, but that is only about 10 cows worth. We compost so little, the state doesn't even require us to have a permit. Note that we use in-vessel containers, meaning the entire composting process takes place inside a container and nothing touches the ground. We use a much safer method than most farmers do in terms of manure, and of course, we routinely test it for pathogens. Peppu-Skidoo is still a very small business that is trying to set an example for other communities that want to do the same thing. I need Buncombe County support in order to continue forward. I ask you to please add composting to the exemption list for stormwater management. If you're considering adding composting but want to add restrictions, I suggest some or all of the following. Limit the exemption to in-vessel composting. Limit the exemption to composting under 30,000 pounds per month, which is about 14 cows worth of manure. Limit the exemption to material on site to be less than 6,000 cubic yards at any given time. That is referring to a North Carolina state composting rule. After this meeting, I invite you to watch my 6-minute YouTube video that explains the situation in more detail. I also invite you to view my petition that now has over 800 signatures and read the comments that locals have been leaving in regards to this issue. I do have copies of this presentation as well as some photos and more information to the YouTube video and everything, if I could hand those out.
Please do. And you live in Black Mountain?
The site's in Black Mountain.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's. Just give it
Do you have an extra? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming today. And do we have more public comment, Dee Dee?
As you might already know, my name is Dee Dee Stiles, and I live in Swananoa. Buncombe County is a headwaters area. The water that the city of Asheville collects and feeds out to people in Buncombe County and in Asheville comes directly from the mountain into the reservoir and then out to the people's houses. After that, it goes to the sewage treatment plant and on down the river, or the water that comes from the mountains that just goes into the river and into the French Broad River, eventually makes its way actually north into Ohio and into the Mississippi River and back to the Gulf of Mexico. All along that route, the people, big cities and small cities, are getting their drinking water from the river. If we don't take care of the water here, then we're not only hurting ourselves, we're hurting everybody from here to the Gulf of Mexico. The whole of Appalachian Mountains is a headwaters area, and Buncombe County is an important part of that. The water is our most important resource, but the rules that are currently in place that govern steep slope development are squandering that water at flooding speed. Not only does the water, when we have on steep development on steep slopes with rooftops, driveways, and roads, and the water, instead of soaking into the mountain like it used to, the water runs off into the river and on its way to the Gulf of Mexico, with carrying all the silt and mud that it picked up along the way. And sometimes that causes floods. You know what happened out at Canton. But the worst part of it is what's a little bit happening right now. Now we're in a dry spell. It's hot and dry, but all the water that's been raining is runoff. There's no water in the mountain to give back to the creeks and the streams during times of drought. And what I would ask you to do in the next couple of days until the end of the week, please try to observe the streams that are near to where you live. Notice how low they are going. Most farmers water their fields from the creeks. And the farmers that I know are in a fix right now because the water is so low in the creek that they can't draw water to water their crops. The subdivision ordinance needs to include, if you're changing it, it needs to include some way for some regulations that the subdivision on a steep slope needs to contain the water that belongs on the mountain in that subdivision. They can have rain gardens, they can have collection ponds like the grocery store does. They got a big pond over there where the water from the parking lot runs in there. And before it goes to, it soaks in the ground before it goes to the river. But the subdivisions need that. And it needs to be retroactive. We're already losing too much water. And water is the next big crisis on the whole world. And other countries are now actually looking at the mountains in this country to buy up watersheds and water routes. So we need to be real careful with our water, or we're going to be in a big trouble. I worked hard on the comprehensive plan. I was on the steering committee, and I did everything I could to make that a success. But what it looks like to me now is that the planning department and the county commissioners and the planning board are just sitting there and letting the creeks go dry. I need a way to find out what it is that you all are considering and to try to make sure that somehow we save the water that we have when it rains, that the water doesn't run off, that we keep it here and let it come out naturally like it used to before the mountains were degraded. My only consolation in this whole process is that I'm old. And by the time we get to a really serious water crisis, I'm going to be dead and gone, and I won't have to worry about it.
Thank you, Dee Dee. All right. Are there any follow-up thoughts, or anyone else in the public needs to make a comment? And I think we're through with the public comment. Any other thoughts from the board? Then that was the last item on our agenda. So I guess next we are a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And we are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you all for being here.